anatomy. And as usual with me in the way I do things, I gave you all the anatomy and I throw in a little bit of where we're going to go with it, kind of not really the physiology, but we get a little more physiology in A&P 1 when we do special senses. We got to talk about how things work. So I put the pieces there, and then we come back here and say, okay, well, how do we actually hear? What's the perception of hearing? We know the parts, let's put them together. If you've ever done a hearing test, which all of us have, you get these numbers, 500 to 5,000 hertz, audible range, 20 to 20,000 hertz. That's all those little beeps you're hearing, right? And I don't know about y'all, but I think it's unfair when you're doing that hearing test. I've never done bad on it, I guess, but when you're going and it stops for like 10, 20 seconds, it doesn't do anything, like thinking it's over, but you're still listening. And every now and then I'm like, I'll do that. There's got to be something there. Maybe I can time this thing. And then like 20 seconds later when you think, take these headphones off, you hear real. How's that? I don't know. That was weird. I actually keep everything record-wise. And I'm part of that, they call us Gen X generation. I keep everything in paper. I do. I have files at home. And I have every document probably the military has ever given me. And I had my hearing test from when I joined the military and when I got out. And I actually did better on the one when I got out. That's fun. I think because back when I joined, I really, what is this? I can hear. You get out. Of course, when you get out, you're supposed to do the opposite. You're supposed to miss every one of them. VA disability, you're messing with there. All right. One of the physical exams you will love to do as PAs is, okay, I think my favorite exit physical for retirement, you got to get physical, that I ever did on a military person was, I don't remember his rank. I think he was a major, but he was a National Guard pilot. And pilots are great to do physicals on because their whole career, they've never had a problem. But the day they retired, then they're broken. They are broken. Because they don't mention it. I mean, I'm not faulting them. They just don't mention it because they want to fly. So now that they're done, they're like, yeah, I got this. Unless it's going to take them out of flying once they get out. They got all sorts of problems at the end. To each their own, however they want to do it. All right, so if we look at, what I focus on here more is, well, what are the criteria for these sounds? Rather than go, well, that's the range, great. Amplitude, how much that we can define out. So threshold is 0 decibels at 1,000 hertz. So most of y'all in this room, that's the first time that you'll pick up a sound, like a little sound in there. When you look at getting at 60 decibels, that's about what we talk at. Most people. I've never been to New York, but I don't think most of them talk at 60 decibels, based on TV only. They talk loud in New York. I've never been there. That's how they depict them on TV. So, TV is always right. What? Or actually, I've taken, who else talks loud? My relatives from East Texas that are like 80 years old. I'm right here. Yeah, redneck. 90 decibels though. At 90 decibels, when you look at OSHA standards, you must have hearing protection on. So the military follows that. Nowadays you can wear earplugs to Afghanistan. You can come back and try to get on a mass lawsuit and hopefully get $1, apparently, according to social media. Yeah, you ever seen that? You wore these triple flag. Yeah, we all did. We're fine. Actually, some of y'all are like, well, we didn't even have those triple. Well, maybe y'all aren't old enough for this. These stick cigarette butts in their ears. They'd be out on the range. That's hilarious. I didn't think anything of it at the time. Rock concerts or your headphones are generally going at about 110 decibels, which over time is going to damage your ears. So I've spent a lot of slides here to kind of walk through real slow how physiology of hearing occurs. Going back through our anatomy, and this is right out of your book where it shows as you see sounds or you hear sounds, there's sound waves that are entering the external auditory canal. And they're funneled in there by your auricles, right? Our big or small ears there. Once those sound waves, I realize I could talk about this all in one slide. Once the sound waves enter that, they're going to strike the tympanic membrane and cause it to vibrate, assuming there's no problems there. Remembering that the handle of the malleus, and this is actually a great picture because it's a lot bigger than what I showed you yesterday. You have the malleus articulating with the incus, articulating with the stapes. So the handle of the mouth, that's the first time. I normally don't write on this screen. I thought it was just this screen the whole time. It's messed up. It just did that funky line again. When the tympanic membrane starts to vibrate, because it's attached to the handle of the malleus, it's going to cause those ossicles to start to move, to vibrate with that tympanic membrane. And because of the situation, mechanical relationships, and how large the TM is compared to the ossicles and the stapes where it fits into the oval window, that's going to cause it to be amplified to an extent so we can pick up those lower noises. When the stapes, so we vibrated our ossicles, and when the stapes starts to vibrate, it's connected to the oval window. And you can't see it here in this picture, but the oval window is on that portion between the semicircular canals and the cochlea, and you had an area called the vestibule. The oval window is there, and inside of that, you're going to have your fluids. And so the stapes will start to push in and out on the oval window, which is caused by the vibration of those ossicles. As that oval window moves in and out, that's going to set up a fluid wave instead of sound waves. Now you have a fluid wave that's going to be moving the perilymph. So remember, we have a bony labyrinth, a membranous labyrinth that runs throughout the inner ear structures. The perilymph is kind of on the outside, bony labyrinth, and then the endolymph's in the membranous labyrinth. So this is pushing in and out on that perilymph and causing pressure waves. Those pressure waves are going to get transmitted to the scalovestibuli first. So they're going to start to move out. They're going to start to move through here. And they will go all the way through the scalovestibuli. They call it, just because things that are obvious to me aren't always to y'all. Where did the oval window hook up to? Or where did the stapes of the oval window hook up to? Why did I say that? The vestibule? Because the vestibule has the perilymph in it that's connected to the scalovestibuli. Right? They're kind of named the same. So the fluid starts to have that pressure wave in the scalovestibuli first, and then it's going to make its way through there, and as it does, it's going to start to deform the walls inside of these structures. And it will travel all the way around until it gets to the end. It's not really the end, it's more of the middle. Remember, there's an area called the helicotremia, which is a small hole that allows that pressure wave to move through and into the skeleton tympanic. It'll travel all the way around. You have that pressure wave going through there. As they deform, as that pressure wave goes through the perilymph, it's going to deform the walls also of the vestibular membranes. We have to orientate kind of our picture back. This is the basilar membrane. When we look for the vestibular membrane, that's here. And this is the tectoral membrane. Now I'm going to back up for just a second and show you this picture. So if we orientate, my lines are, I don't ever use this. When you look at the basilar membrane, it's here. When you look at the tectoral membrane, it's here. The reason I went back to this is this whole structure is called the organ of Corti. And that's where the hair cells for hearing are at. We have that tectoral membrane that's overlying there and kind of in contact, like I said, but not connected to it. And you have the basilar membrane. So if we move this basilar membrane, we'll cause the hairs up here to be moved by the tectoral membrane. The real reason I came back to this, though, is this tectoral membrane in this picture that you would identify that as doesn't look anything like that when we look at the actual. I think it's a funny representation because when we get back to here, we get back to here and we say, well, where was the basilar membrane? Not here. If we drew this line all the way around, here's our basilar membrane. So the organ of Corti is very large, goes all along, and it's not just one, it's all the way down this. Right? That whole yellow area, when we look at it, it comprises that. And then we have this tectoral, oh no, I got lines all over it. We got this tectoral membrane above it. Sorry for all, it looks terrible up there, but you'll get the point. It doesn't really kind of look like that first picture, but it shows us how that organ of Corti is going to sit there. So in this pink area is our endolymph. So as we deform the walls of the basilar membrane, right, the vestibular membrane, we're going to cause the organ of Corti to move up and down, kind of vibrate too from the pressure wave. So that's what it's saying here. The vestibular membrane will move back and forth, and then endolymph will have its own pressure wave that goes through there. Remember the scala media, the part that's in the middle of the cross section, the Y part that's always kind of pinkish, is that endolymph. And that ultimately will cause the hair cells to move. So as they move against the tectoral membrane, that's a key point, because that's how we're going to open those, what they call tip links. We got to finish it out and say, well, the fluid that came all the way back, this is called the round window. And for us, there's no real physiological constants we need to talk about in understanding how the perception of hearing occurs. If you go into like aeronautics, physiology, you might talk about the round window more, but we're not in here. For us, it's just fluid's not compressible, so it hits the round window, and then that pressure wave will kind of die out. So we got to say, now that we see how the pressure waves got to the organ of Corti, got to the hair cells, what's actually happening when those hair cells start to move, they are mechanical gates. It's one of our first true things we look at that are mechanical gate, meaning that if we can move these hairs using those pressure waves, we can open what's called tip links. Tip links are connected to stericocilia. So at the top or apex of each hair cell, you have a stericocilia. So if we look at just, we have one hair cell on the top of it, you're going to have two stericocilia, and they're going to be connected by a tip link. That closes the channel, the tip link does. So because of this, and it's a mechanical gate, we need to open those. So as the stericocilia bend, and we move them in one direction or the other, they're going to open that ion channel. Just a basic representation where I just go every time it does it. It has a tip link there, and then once they move, that tip link will be open. Right? It's going to kind of come open. When it does that, that allows ions to flow into that hair cell and depolarize it. And at the moment, we're not going to talk numbers anymore. We're not going to talk about what ion flows. We're just going to leave it at that. Because, so the take home is, if you bend the stericocilia, it will open that mechanical gate, which technically is opening the tip link between them. That will allow ions to flow in and depolarize the hair cell. When you depolarize the hair cell, that will cause the release of neurotransmitter to that first order sensory neuron for hearing, which everybody in here is about to say, yeah, and that's where the cell bodies for the sensory receptor neurons for hearing are found in the, I heard somebody be close, spiral ganglia. Taking you back to yesterday. Okay. That's it. We don't need to know the ions. We don't need to fully look at that. That's what's going to happen. The last part we look at with hearing here is the auditory pathway. How does it get now that the hair cells have opened up and we stimulated the first order sensory neuron, that's going to create a signal that's got to go back to the cerebral cortex so we can have perception of this hearing. So as those sensory neurons leave the area out here by the cochlea, you got to kind of draw in short lines, so I do long when it does that. It takes a minor tone. It's going to go over here to the medulla oblongata. And then some of them are going to, it's going to synapse there. And then I'm just going to say fibers for now. Is that fair enough? These are tracks that are going up. But some of these fibers are going to cross over at the medulla and go up one side, the other side, and some will go up this side. They're going to synapse here in the pons, and then they're going to go up and wind up here at the inferior colliculi. I can't do anything about those crazy lines it does. Once it goes past the inferior colliculi, it's going to go to the thalamus, because all sensory except olfaction goes to the thalamus. Then the thalamus will map that out to the area of the cerebral cortex responsible for hearing. All right, we threw in part way in there, and don't go counting how many times it's synapse and all that. It goes to the medulla. Here's the key point. That information goes to the medulla. Some stays on that side, some crosses over. Then it goes, we can go basically, it goes up to the inferior colliculi, because we really don't want to skip those. Then it goes to the thalamus, then out to the cortex. That's all I need you to pick up on. I left inferior colliculi in there because, do you remember what inferior colliculi do? That's our, right? Turn your head to a sound. It's also important because if you look at where they're at, I don't know if I left that in the slide. I did. I should have just kept advancing. I told you this part goes faster because I left it in there so that even if you weren't hearing the lecture, you got the material that I thought was important. So if we hear a sound to one side, we can turn our head towards that sound. Because of the crossing over that occurs at the medulla, when that same signal arrives, let's say it's my left ear sends a signal, it goes up to the left side of the medulla. It also crosses over, goes up to the right side, and then they reach the inferior colliculi. They're going to arrive there at different times because of the decussation, because it crossed over. And so that's how we know to turn our head towards that sound. Your brain can tell that that signal was louder. I turned that way, but if it was over here, I would hear it over here. Turn my head. One shot, one kill. Like I said, I just walked you all through these. I just want to be clear, expectations. I do not need you to go and learn these pathways and start memorizing, here's the medial geniculate nucleus in the thalamus. I even said that, I think, already once before. I don't need you to learn the particular nucleus that's there now. I know we did that in neuro. I just need you that recap I gave you, just the general of how it's going. This helps us to understand later when they start talking about it in other classes. Finishing out hearing, you can't leave hearing without talking about tinnitus. You name anything, it causes tinnitus. Not really, but there are so many things that it's easier just to go, well, I gave some examples. Anti-inflammatory medications, sedatives, antidepressants, loud noises, obviously. So we look at, well, what is tinnitus? In other words, another way of saying don't go learn that list of how you get tinnitus. I'm not going to ask you all those, because there's too many things you can go into. But the exact mechanism that causes tinnitus is not fully understood, but we know that young people and military people typically have tinnitus due to exposure to loud noises. Not only your headphones, but being out on the range, being there as the medic, or the medics there, you're out on the range, East Rain of Schofield Barracks, Hawaii. Right? It's always raining up there for those of you who've been there. And you're out on the range, and you're with the Cav Scouts, it's freezing, the range is over, and you got all this extra ammo that you're going to go turn in, right? Now, you're going to blow all that off, and so everybody's gone. There's only a few of you there, and you're the medic, so you're going to join in and shoot off all this ammo. I'm not saying you should do this. This is a true story. I'm up there shooting, and we were talking back and forth as we're standing on the range line, and couldn't hear. So pulled my earplug out. I put 3 clips through that thing before I realized I had that earplug out. I couldn't hear for 3 days. Yeah, that's a true story. Anybody who's ever drawn ammo out knows you want to use what you draw out. I'm trying to stay on track. I'll tell you one story about Calf Scouts. Any Calf Scouts in here? Are you? Calf Scouts are crazy.
Do that now.
So I was in 25th Infantry Division, and I spent a lot of time. Calf Scouts were fun, so they would send the medics out with these Calf Scouts. And all I remember about them is most of them, like they come in, they're in 2 years, they make E5 like 4 or 5 times during that time, because they're always in trouble, and then they're gone. But they would love to do crazy things. And, those same guys I was out on the range once, and they were finishing up the range, but it was a C4. They had all this C4. And they took, I don't know how many pounds of C4 and just blew it at once. You're not going to believe this, but this is a true story. I don't know if you can look it up. They shut down the Schofield Barracks base because I'm sitting there, and I know what they're doing. They're going to blow something up. I wasn't watching. But what they did is they took like a piece of 8x8 railroad tie. You know, it's like this big. It was laying out there. Sat it on top of the C4, and then blew it. And it flew like a half mile or I don't know how far it went. It hit range control tower. And it shut everything down. I mean, that was a huge deal for like a month. So they got demoted, and next month they're back to E5. So, don't get me wrong. In a battle, I want them there with me. They're those ones that are crazy enough. Like, hey, there's 18 guys over there. They're all shooting at you. Go get them. They'll go get them. Go straight at them. Anyway, I'm not putting down Calf Scouts. I love them. I had a great time. Ringing due to loud noises. So yeah, we know this. You got exceptionally loud noises. What's going to happen, what they've seen, is the tip links and those stericocilia, they break off. Sometimes the tip of the stericocilia will break off. When that happens, if it happens to just a few of them, right, those tip links are gone. They're open. That channel's open. And so you're perceiving sound all the time. That's that ring. And then they grow back. So after about 24 hours, or for me, that one time, I guess I damaged more of them. It took like 3 days for I could fully hear. But most people, it's temporary, it grows back. But if you keep doing this over and over, eventually they won't. Just like anything in the body will heal itself. But if you keep doing the same activity that caused it, eventually it won't. So we know what causes this. Other forms of tinnitus, not exactly sure. If you didn't know this, tinnitus is, we think of it in the military. I hear it all the time. It's like passe, is that the word for it? Kind of, we don't really think about it. Everybody goes, yeah, I got a little bit of tinnitus. Only when it's quiet. Some people suffer from tinnitus. Remember Meniere's disease, roaring tinnitus? Some people have tinnitus so bad, like they couldn't sit here in this room and function. They can't sleep. They have big problems because it's so loud. Most people, it's just, yeah, I have some ringing. Deafness. Have y'all started this in the physical exam stuff you're doing here, using the tonometer on your head? Have you done that yet? So when you do hearing, you look at, is it sensory neural hearing loss or conductive hearing loss? And they're going to talk a lot about this and how it is. And I put it all on the screen too. But here's the difference. If the sound waves cannot reach the inner ear, you have a conductive hearing loss. If the problem is in the inner ear, you can't mechanically transmit things. That's a sensory neural hearing loss. In other words, everything up to the oval window, when you say, well, is my ear blocked with wax? Is my tympanic membrane sclerotic? Can't vibrate? Are my ossicles, as you get older, your ossicles can build up deposits on them. Anything that doesn't allow that sound wave to be transmitted to the fluid, basically, is considered a conductive hearing loss. And you can test these by taking the tonometer, right, and they hold it up to your ear. And can you hear that? Does it sound the same over here? Right? We're testing conduction. And then if they stick it on top of your head, and I'm like, well, can you hear that? Can you hear that the same in both ears? Because it's conducting through the bone. And in that case, you're not using sound or air, right, waves. You're putting it right through the bone, like your bone conducting headphones. If you put those on and you couldn't hear it in one ear, you have a sensory neural hearing loss. That's the easiest way to kind of differentiate between them. And then I think the last thing is autoacoustic emissions. There are better ways to do this now, but they still teach this, and I'm sure some people still use it, is you can take a small, really sensitive microphone in a newborn and put it next to their tympanic membrane. Because when you set up a pressure wave that goes through the skeleton, vestibuli, skeleton, tympani, and it's going to travel. And so an infant cannot tell you, yeah, I can hear that. It can't say that. But it also causes a sound wave, a smaller one, that comes back towards the ossicles and can kind of move them the reverse way. And it's so slight that they can pick up that movement at the tympanic membrane. And they can tell that this, structurally, they should be able to hear. That's not good. There's better ways now, because that's not really going to rule out a sensory neural hearing loss, right? If you have a problem with a neuron, that won't tell you that. So that's called autoacoustic emissions. I just talked through all that. Last part is equilibrium. It's getting hotter. Anybody want to come up and teach? Let me sit for a little bit. I don't know where they went. I bet the seniors have them, but they used to do this all the time, and they had big fans that we put back in the doors and kind of blow in the outside air. I bet there's like 6 of them in the senior classroom or something. They're around here somewhere. Y'all don't look cocky. How'd y'all pull off PTs again? I'm going to give me some A&P I PTs. That's our department. Anatomy, physiology, and they tagged on pharmacies. Now we're AP. Instead of a full AP. I'm going to have to get some of this made on PTs. Join me up. We're going to keep this up. I don't have anything better than that, so we'll just keep going. Equilibrium. I know y'all want to keep. Y'all got a full day in this? No, that's good. I'm glad. Don't get me wrong. I'm glad we're here rather than Kansas. Equilibrium. Vestibular apparatus. Anytime you hear vestibular ganglion, all these things, think equilibrium. So there are 2 different types of equilibrium. We're looking at where your head is in space, really, but static equilibrium is looking at where the body is, mainly the head, relative to gravity. Right? So as you're sitting there, actually, when you're sitting and just staring at me in your absence seizure, your head's not moving, static equilibrium is really not registering. When you look at dynamic equilibrium, it's like you're running. It's looking still at where the head's at, but as you're moving more. We'll talk about this in relationship to like motion sickness. So the receptor organs for equilibrium are located in the vestibular apparatus. So going back to our anatomy, we said over there by the vestibule area of the inner ear, we had a saccule, a utricle, and then semicircular ducts. Particularly in the semicircular ducts, we had a dilated portion called the ampulla. All 3 of those areas are collectively called the vestibular apparatus, where we're going to pick up static and dynamic equilibrium. It looks fairly similar to how the cochlea is set up with the hair cells, with just a slight difference, well, a few slight differences. The first one that we're going to talk about is static. Static equilibrium uses areas called the macula. And you find these in the saccule and the utricle. And the macula looks like this. So the macula is going to have receptor cells for equilibrium, and it's also going to have hair cells that come off of it. When you look at its location, the macula is horizontal in the utricle, it's going to be vertical in the saccule. This is our gyroscope. Overlying, this is different than the cochlea, and this is different than dynamic equilibrium. Only in static equilibrium do we see this. You have the hair cell sensory receptors. There are supporting cells next to it. They produce what's called a glycoprotein layer, and it contains some calcium crystals. So this area here is that glycoprotein layer. It's overlying those hairs. And if you look really closely, I'm going to draw it on here, there's all these little calcium carbonate type crystals. They're all packed. I didn't want to talk ahead, so I'm going to keep it the slide. That layer sits over those hair cells. The hair cells on the equilibrium side, you really don't have to think of them as any different than we saw with the cochlea. But you have a stericocilia, then they also have what's called a kinocilium. So they really have three little hair cells there. And it's nothing we really need to pick up on. It's just longer than a stericocilia. But it's still going to have hair cells that are connected by a tip link. So it's still going to be a mechanical gate. And you can kind of see what I'm talking about right here. So you got one that's longer, that's a kinocilium, or kinocilium. So those calcium crystals are actually called otoliths. So another name for the surface over that glycoprotein layer, where those crystals are, we call it the otolithic membrane. Those calcium carbonate crystals are called otoliths, dealing with the ear. And what we're going to see is they move as we shift our head. So when you take your head and you're, actually, when they move is when you're in your absence seizure, but you go a little too far into it and you're asleep. And as you go down and you move your head, that otolithic membrane that's sitting over those hairs, whether it's vertical or horizontal, right? As you tilt, this layer is the jelly, glycoprotein layer, with calcium carbonate crystals that are over those hair cells. As you tilt your head, because it has that line over them, it's going to cause it to shift one way or the other. That makes sense? Picture kind of balancing, like you have. Picture if you built your Jello mold, but you didn't mix everything in. You put it all at the top, and if you were holding that and you tilted it, the Jello mold would kind of bend over, right, due to the weight on top of the Jello. Same thing's happening here, except it's otoliths. It's going to cause that glycoprotein layer to move. Have you ever heard of like Dick Hall pipe maneuvers? Anybody? It's a good thing that you'll learn here in PA school, and that's one of the few. One of the things I would say, that could become important. I actually had to look them up and use them in Afghanistan. These crystals, this is going to sound funny, don't worry about it, can get out of place and cause people, they can get stuck, and they cause people to have this whirling type of vertigo, dizziness. And I had one when I was on a deployment to Afghanistan where he just couldn't even stand up. What's that? Yeah. And there's Dick Hall pipe, there's different maneuvers. But what you can use them for is you lay them down. And I don't remember every bit of it to this day. You will soon. But you're going to take them and lay them down, rotate their head in different positions to help try and realign these crystals. And I did it per Google through the Pakistani internet. And it worked. He was fine. He got up, went on with the mission. So now I recommend that. Make sure when you hear Apley's maneuvers, Dick Hall pipe, those types of things, that you do them, or that you kind of learn them, or at least know they exist. So nowadays we can look it up. Right? All right. Remember, I'm still generalizing. So if we bend the glycoprotein layer, those otoliths, we shift them, that's going to move the hair cells, open the tip link, ions will flow in and depolarize that cell that's there, that receptor cell for equilibrium. That will cause a release in neurotransmitter, to the first order neuron associated with the equilibrium side, cranial nerve 8. Once you close it, it will repolarize it. So if you look at the macula, like I said, they don't respond to changes in acceleration or velocity, movement of the head. Right? In other words, they have no way to register if you're sitting very still, but you're in a car that's moving at a constant speed, they still wouldn't be registering. Dynamic equilibrium would, but static, right? As long as you're holding your head still, no matter what's going on around you. Now in my wife's driving, your macula would be working overtime. Put the cruise on. She don't like to use cruise control. So in other words, what I'm saying is they don't adapt to unchanging head positions. Head has to move. Okay, so that's all of static equilibrium. Now one of the things people confuse here, we're going into dynamic equilibrium. And dynamic equilibrium looks similar. We're going to have a gelatinous layer over some hair cells. There are no otoliths associated with dynamic equilibrium. Otoliths are only found on the macula. Why? I don't know. But I'll tell you this one's going to move too because this is part of dynamic equilibrium, which is tied into proprioception. And remember, we have visual inputs, we have joint kinetic receptors throughout the body. We have, remember, a lot of things tie into proprioception, but these are also going to help with that. So they can help tell where your head is now as you're moving your body around. The way these are set up, you still have supporting cells, you still have hair cells, you still have stericocilia and kinocilium, and you still have this gelatinous material. Okay, so all of that, this is just definition stuff. All of that is called the crista ampullaris. Most people just say the crista in response to dynamic equilibrium. But if you're talking about just the gelatin that's on top of that, just little gelatinous mass there, that's called the cupola. In this case, these are found in the semicircular canals, in the ampulla. As each one of those semicircular canals reach back to the vestibule, there's a dilated portion called the ampulla. And in there, you're going to have your crista ampullaris. And so this is the ampulla. And this is your crista ampullaris with your cupola over the hair. So when you move your head, the endolymph that's in the membranous labyrinth is starting to shift, and that's moving that fluid back and forth. And as it does that, it's going to push that cupola over. Again, it's going back and forth, and the potentials that will set up. I kind of simplified it here. That will move the hair cells. That will allow ions to flow in to that receptor cell, depolarize it. Then it will release neurotransmitter to the first order vestibular side sensory neuron of cranial nerve 8. If I generalize too much, y'all kind of getting the gist by now. It works pretty similar. If the body continues to rotate, like you get on a merry-go-round or you're in an airplane, you're still spinning, eventually you'll catch up and things will look like normal. Right? Because the endolymph is caught with that speed, it's not really moving. But if picture being on a merry-go-round, and all of a sudden you're on the merry-go-round, everything on the merry-go-round looks still as long as you're on it. But if you stop that merry-go-round very suddenly, guess what's going to happen? All that endolymph's going to shift all at once, and that's where you're going to be so dizzy when you get off. If you take your kid and spin them around, you can do the same thing to them. So the body stops, but the endolymph keeps moving until it kind of balances out. I wanted to mention here, in dynamic equilibrium is where we can have vestibular nystagmus. Remember back to our talk on nystagmus, you had In nystagmus, you have horizontal, vertical nystagmus. Horizontal is what police use often trying to see your field sobriety test. Then I said there's vestibular nystagmus. So if these receptors are abnormally getting activated, you can have vestibular nystagmus, and your eyes are going to kind of be all over the place. Like I said, if you stop somebody on a merry-go-round and look at their eyes, you can hold them still long enough, you'll see they're kind of jittering all over the place. And that can cause vertigo. Now, people with abnormal, like lymph, like Meniere's disease, different disorders have abnormal lymph amounts. Endolymph can have vestibular nystagmus. Oh my goodness, we're at an equilibrium pathway. That means we don't have too many slides left. I didn't mean to do it all the first hour. I know that's disappointing to y'all. I don't feel like I was going fast, so I guess it's all the questions. That was sarcasm. So, equilibrium pathway. It goes fast. We're going to have a lot of pictures where we don't need them in this one. You can condense them down to one picture like that. So cell bodies, first-order sensory neurons that are found in the vestibular ganglion are associated with equilibrium. So the axons that are leaving that vestibular ganglion are part of the vestibular branch of the vestibular cochlear nerve. Once again, do not go in here and try to digest this whole picture. I'm just using it as an example. These are also going to go to the medulla oblongata. Some will stay on that side, some will cross over. There are axons that are different than with hearing. I like to say it funny ways. Do you think it's a good idea that we send our vestibular inputs for equilibrium to our cerebellum? Cerebellum is associated with movements. So your cerebellum receives vestibular inputs on its way up this brainstem here. And so the cerebellum and the vestibular nuclei are connected both ways. They're bidirectional, whatever. It talks to the cerebellum. And then it will travel on up higher and go to the thalamus. From the thalamus out to the vestibular area of the cerebral cortex. If you don't hear it now, or if you're listening to it later, the way I'm generalizing it is all you got to know. Not all the little nucleus that it's going to, okay? Said that several times just so you didn't waste your time on this. But I did want to show you the pathway. So we can't leave hearing and vestibular inputs without talking about some hearing disorders. And then one of the big ones that people see is motion sickness. Motion sickness, and there's some differing thoughts on what actually is causing your motion sickness, but I think it's, it talks about maybe due to rapidly fluctuating stimuli. The reason there's some confusion of thought is why do some people get motion sickness and other people don't? Other people don't. Reading a book while someone else is driving a car, people will often get motion sickness. They feel nauseous. So if you think about it, we're sitting in a car. The vehicle, as you sit there, you're stationary. But the vehicle is moving. It's accelerating, decelerating. It's moving. Not only is it moving, then you're staring at the dash. It's not moving, or you're staring at that book. But then in your peripheral vision, outside, everything's flying by. So that gives the perception of moving. Plus, so you can sense that the car is moving. You can see the visual stimuli flying by, but then you're reading a book that's stationary. So that's a contradiction to the inputs that you're receiving. And if you go, well, wait a minute, that makes sense. We all do that. Well, we didn't. We didn't have cars till, I don't know when. But cars are a new thing relatively to our species, I would think. So you have a discrepancy. What you're sensing differs from your visual stimuli, and not only that, your visual stimuli is seeing two different things, a stationary inside of the car and a moving outside. And so they can give you anti-motion drugs that suppress this. Same thing as, like you talk about motion sickness on ships. That ship's moving all the time. If you ever walked on a cruise ship, you can feel it moving as you walk, if it's just mildly moving. So I don't know why some people get it and some people don't. I do know this. If you're the passenger that always gets motion sickness when you try to read or use your phone, all you got to do to change that, drive. People who get motion sickness when they're in a car as a passenger often don't get it when they're driving. But if you're driving with me, I'm not letting you drive, so that's going to be a problem. I do not let other people drive, and I do not ride public transit. I know. Crazy things y'all learn about me in here. There is not a day in mark my words. You can come back, find me on Facebook 20 years from now. Never in my life will I be inside of a, I'm going to kill you with a stranger Uber. Oh my goodness, y'all. My kids my girls are absolutely banned from doing that. I don't care. But I don't care about them trying to kill you. I don't want to ride with you if I know you. Much less get in your nasty car that, how do y'all do that? I know all of y'all do. How do y'all do that? Let me throw a caveat in there. Would I ride an Uber nowadays? Y'all have it made. If I was drunk at a bar. Yes, get you an Uber. But just be ready.
Just be ready.
Everybody, oh, they're so safe. It's safe as a cab. You gotta do it. That's a good point. You get killed walking outside of here today. Okay, these are your definitions. A few for. I see you over there. And that gets to the end of that time. You do that so fast. Yeah. All right. I think he was right.
Yeah. If you are more, like if you experience motion sickness, are you more predisposed to vertigo?
I would think so. I mean, I never studied that, but I would think so because I'm looking through the physiology of my mind because vertigo is a whole separate thing. Some people who develop vertigo have never had it in their life. And all of a sudden, they come in and say, they don't come in because they can't stand up. It's different than somebody, like have you ever had a cold that stops up your ears and everything and you feel kind of dizzy, things are off? Maybe you have a difference in the amount of endolymph that's there at the time. But I don't know that you always link motion sickness and vertigo. A lot of people who have motion sickness that I've seen, they don't really feel dizzy so much as they feel nauseous. Anybody get motion sickness that can affirm that? I don't get motion sickness, but my wife will just say, I feel nauseous, I'm going to have to stop and get out or something. She doesn't get out and feel dizzy. That's why in my mind I'm working through the physiology. I would think, I've only seen that one person that had very bad vertigo. I need to track him down now and see, hey, do you get motion sickness, man? It's a good question. You always ask these thoughtful questions. Right at the end, too, everybody's like, man, it's hot. But we got another question.
Sorry. So all the hardware for dynamic equilibriums in the ampulla, you got these big semicircular ducts that are just filled with endolymph. What's the purpose of them?
That's where the endolymph's flowing. So there's that bony labyrinth, which is actually just an opening in the temporal bone. And so the fluid's going to kind of shift through there. Why it goes like that, I don't know. But they are orientated differently. Like your ampullas aren't all flat like they see on the picture. They're orientated differently.
And then what was the so what for the pathway for equilibrium? You have all those slides, you said the so what. The so what was very basic about the pathway.
For equilibrium pathway?
Yeah.
It goes from the vestibular cochlear nerve, the vestibular branch, to the medulla. Basically, you could say to the cerebellum, to the thalamus, to the cerebral cortex. That's it. I didn't want you to learn where it's synapsing, what it's synapsing with, what's the nucleus, just that pathway. Same thing with hearing. The only thing we did in hearing, we added the inferior colliculi so that we understood that you have the movement to sound. And with the vestibular inputs, we got to send that information to the cerebellum also. I just wanted you to generally recognize where it's going. You don't need to pathway that out. Yes?
So for motion sickness, because you said it's because you were seeing two different things?
Yeah.
But then some people, they close their eyes, they sleep and whatever in the car, right? They still have some sort of motion sickness.
You still have a mismatch, right? Because your body's sitting there and it thinks it's still. but you're actually moving. So a good example would be my wife. But even if you close your eyes, you can still, you're sitting still, but all you're feeling is. It's a mismatch still for those people. But some people closing their eyes, it does help. It's funny, my wife got on a cruise though, and she didn't have motion sickness. She took Dramamine the first day. She was out. I had the whole day to myself. Didn't take it again after that. I couldn't stay awake. That's funny. Wasn't funny. I say that's funny a lot. I say that's funny to a lot of things that aren't funny. Don't ever take me serious. You'll know when I'm being serious. Any other questions? I know y'all don't want to sit here in the heat. We're already into your break, but now we don't have a second hour. As always, I'm going to say it every test. Some of y'all took advantage of it last time. If you got questions, you got to get with me before Friday. Right? Friday morning is not the great time to do it. Right? Let me know what's confusing. As always, like you just asked about, can you recap the vestibular pathway? What's important? If you got that question again, send it to me on email. I will tell you again. That's exactly what I wanted you to get out of this slide. You know, sometimes you read a slide and you're like, I don't remember what was important here. There's a lot of stuff on this slide. I do not take it negative. I don't take it negative if you say, hey, I'm looking at slide 33. I'm trying to get the take home on this slide. I don't get it. Because that can hold you up sometimes. And I'm going to tell you, no, in class, I said, you only need to know this. You know, the flip side is, don't ever ask I'm giving y'all advice. Don't ever go to an instructor and say, is this going to be on the test? Or do I need to know this for the test? Y'all heard that before recently or something? When you're an instructor, you'll see that's kind of a rude way to say it. But can you ask people things without saying it that way? Yeah, just like I just said, hey, I was rereading slide 33, and I kind of know about vestibular inputs, but I wasn't sure exactly how far you wanted us to go into this. Does that sound kind of more tactful than, hey, I was looking at this, and I'm wondering if this bullet's on the test. And I've had people do that in my A lot of times I just go, maybe. No, I'll tell them. But oftentimes, none of y'all have done that. Nobody's asked me a question that way. Y'all are a very good class about that. But I'm telling you, as you get further on, you're going to get disgruntled by the pace and by the courses and how you're trying to figure out your expectation may not be as clear as I hopefully am making it sometimes. I know I got a lot of stuff, but I try to keep expectations clear. When the expectations aren't clear, you start to get irritated. And you start to ask those things. I just want to know, you blew this off, is it on the test? And I've heard people say that to an instructor, and I'm like, oh, this is not going to go good. It might go good with me or Ruggiero, because we fully de-integrated from the military. But you ask that to one of the majors over there teaching one of the courses, that's not going to go good. And they're probably just going to throw you out of it. Get out of my office. I'm not saying that's right or wrong. I'm sorry. I don't need to keep talking. Y'all pick up.